Hi everybody, my name is Ian McLaughlin and I have a PhD in neuroscience, and today I'd like to talk about a topic that's been pretty rapidly becoming one of the most important sources of innovation in biomedical science: artificial intelligence. And so, of course, there are many dimensions to artificial intelligence, particularly in the context of neuroscience and consciousness. Probably the most prominent question is, will artificial intelligence ever be able to become a substrate for something like human intelligence or human consciousness? Super enticing topic, right? Something I've discussed in the past a little bit, but the reality is that essentially all conversations that explore that topic are speculation, right? They're speculating. They're educated, highly informed, and oftentimes probably accurate predictions. However, as deeply interesting as that topic is, that's not actually what I want to talk about today. So I want to talk about some developments that I think are far more likely to produce like tangible changes in our lives, like within our lifetimes. Not like some theoretical future, like 10 years from now is what we're talking about. So, and to be clear, it's always very risky to make a specific prediction like that, 10 years. But the point I'm making is that I think it's pretty clear that we're far closer to this technology coming to fruition than the concept of like a true artificial general intelligence, or an AGI, right? Sometimes called strong AI. Basically a form of artificial intelligence that behaves quite a bit like human intelligence, and perhaps surpasses it. So, as interesting a topic as that is, which is very interesting, I want to talk about, a far more proximal prospect. Okay, so something that's inevitably going to affect all of our lives in the pretty near future. So the role of artificial intelligence in medicine. And so, just this past week or so, several scientific articles have been published that are, specifically focused on, new demonstrations of the use of artificial intelligence to improve various medical outcomes. And there are quite a few companies out there that are working on, developing platforms to be deployed in clinical settings that have already demonstrated quite a bit of efficacy and accuracy. But before we dive into the specific article for today, I think it might be helpful to get a sense of what it is exactly that we mean when we say artificial intelligence. And so to begin, artificial intelligence has become, one of those terms that's used so broadly that it's kind of lost any specificity, right? Obviously, at the simplest level, artificial intelligence refers to a form of intelligence that's artificial, right? I hope I didn't blow your mind, blow your brain out of your ears just then. But that super broad, fundamental definition is why it's used to describe everything from, Siri to Alexa to the prospect of non-biological manifestations of consciousness that's essentially indistinguishable from human intelligence. Like, for example, this is an image from the movie Ex Machina, which is what I think has been the best movie that explores the topic of artificial intelligence, or at least, what I think most people think of, when they hear that term, AI, artificial intelligence. Really interesting movie, definitely recommended if you've not seen it. But, when I say the best movie that explores the topic of AI, I definitely don't mean to imply it's my favorite. My favorite, by far, is The Matrix. And in fact, The Matrix is my favorite movie of all time. And I've talked about, my sort of petty gripes with the movie, but it's absolutely my favorite movie of all time. And I'm super thoroughly excited that the next Matrix movie is coming out like in a few months. And I'm already preparing myself for like avoiding seeing people's takes on how good or bad it is. Do I see simple characters that even resemble the Matrix or Keanu Reeves, or that general gritty aesthetic on Twitter? Keep scrolling, right? Anyways, so The Matrix imagines a world where AI has advanced to a level that's quite a bit beyond a specific, moment of technological development that we need to achieve, right? That's still entirely theoretical given our current level of technology and understanding of human intelligence, and so it's just lovely science fiction. However, artificial intelligence extends to far more than sentient robots that would pass the Turing test with flying colors. And I'm sure anyone who's watching this is quite familiar with the Turing test, but without going too deep, it's a concept that a person named Alan Turing developed, which was basically a way to evaluate whether a machine was able to exhibit behavior that was intelligent enough that it would be indistinguishable from human behavior, as judged by a human. And so if you're unfamiliar with the story of Alan Turing and you have any interest in artificial intelligence whatsoever, or consciousness, neuroscience, whatever, I highly recommend exploring his story. Extremely interesting and unique and brilliant person who lived a remarkable life and experienced quite a bit of tragedy, unfortunately. But anyways, so Turing had an indelible influence on how we think about artificial intelligence by introducing the concept of whether there's like a major difference between a machine that can absolutely and completely reproduce human intelligence and a machine that no human would identify as artificial, right? So in other words, like when you're interacting with this manifestation of a computer, if you can't tell that it's not a human, at what point do we decide that it's intelligent, right? And so anyways, artificial intelligence is now used to refer to, much more than just like an extremely convincing like chatbot or robot or something, right? And it's very fertile ground for philosophical debate. And so maybe one of the most influential books written about artificial intelligence is by a philosopher named Nick Bostrom. And so called Superintelligence. And so Nick Bostrom's book definitely explores the prospect of artificial intelligence that touches on a future that could include something that's not particularly foreign to the Matrix, right? An artificial intelligence that's quite literally posing a threat to the survival of humans because it's so significantly superior to our own intelligence that we, might as well be the equivalent of an ant to them, as ants are to us, right? And so, all those concerns are meaningful and absolutely worthy of discussion and fun to talk about. If a true artificial general intelligence, a form of AI that's basically equivalent, if not superior to human intelligence, all of those concerns of such an intelligence surpassing humanity aren't just fun speculation. But at least today, that's not the kind of AI that exists. And, at least today, we all pretty regularly hear about AI in various forms today, right? And that includes in biomedical science and in biotech. And generally speaking, the central concept to what people mean when they say AI in contemporary manifestations of AI is really machine learning. And so I'm absolutely no expert in how machine learning works. It's one of those things that I wish I'd explored a little bit more when I was still in graduate school. But while I was in graduate school, I knew folks who were working on various applications of machine learning, for research purposes. And so fundamentally the idea is that an artificial system, right, is capable of improving itself, or finding new patterns within a data set, following exposure to new information, right? And so it's kind of like, and I've done this, if I were to spend an hour showing, my 2.5-year-old daughter a whole bunch of pictures of trees, right? And asking her to name them and recognize them and stuff. And so these are all, different kinds of trees right here. And by the way, one of them is a Japanese maple, and maple trees happen to be fairly common around our neighborhood here in Philly. And we both agree, my daughter and I, that the Japanese maple is our favorite tree. Such a cool tree, just so weird, so beautiful. It's the red one right in the middle there. And so, anyways, imagine me, right, sitting here with a fledgling human sitting on my lap, as we do, and we're looking at pictures of trees on, my computer, right? And we're memorizing the names of each of them, as we go through them. And by the way, I've literally done exactly that with her. And so she can name each of the plants, right behind me right now. She can most definitely distinguish Japanese maple from other types of maple, and she can distinguish English ivy and Boston ivy from whatever other kinds of ivy. And so, can you tell that I'm proud? But clearly the curse of having a scientist as a parent. But what's amazing to observe is that she can identify Japanese maple no matter where we are in the city, right? Even if she's never seen the tree that she's seeing, right? And so it's not just, the same exact tree every time is what I'm, trying to convey here. It's Japanese maple that, she's never seen. It's in a part of the city she's never been in, right? And so that's sort of what I'm talking about, sort of a versatile, generalizable ability to recognize. And so, to be fair, it is a pretty distinctive tree, right? With pretty distinctly beautiful leaves. But hey, she's just a little baby, right? And so, I'm pretty thrilled. But, So anyways, imagine that you're spending a solid hour training a human to recognize trees, right, as a category, and you're showing them all these various pictures of trees, right, and eventually certain themes will start to pop out, right? Central trunk. The trunks have different sizes, textures, and colors. Trees will have branches, and the branches have different thicknesses. Some trees have a ton of branches, some have very few. The branches are always different shapes, but they're there. They have leaves. Leaves can be different shapes as well, and different colors, and sometimes trees have no leaves, but they're still trees. And so, sometimes there's snow on the leaves, and sometimes the same exact tree has leaves with different colors at different times of the year, right? That could be kind of confusing. And so you get the point, tons of categories and variation within those categories. And also quite a bit of variation between trees. But however, the vast majority of trees are far more similar to each other than they are to things like boats, right? Or, stars or buildings or whatever, right? Or people. And so, I'm sure it's pretty intuitive that the more trees you see, the easier it is to recognize a tree when you're seeing it for the first time, right? However, what happens when you see a palm tree, right? It definitely looks like a tree. It has a central trunk. It has leaf-like thingies sticking out of the top that are pretty much generally green. They grow, they need sun and water and nutrients and all that kind of stuff. But not all palms have a woody trunk, right? Which is one of the more common definitions of trees. So the lipstick palm, for example, right? It has the leaves, but not really a central trunk. And definitely not a woody central trunk. Another common part of the definition of trees is that they have secondary growth, right? Which is basically, the process by which trees, get tree trunks get wider and wider, right? Which you can see here in one of those sort of classic pictures of what a tree looks like when you cut it horizontally, right? And so you can see an example of that classic growth pattern, right? That secondary growth on the left there, with the various rings of growth that you'd expect to see as a tree gets older and older, right? However, on the right side of this image right here, you are seeing a cross-section of a palm tree. No rings. There aren't any rings because palm trees don't do that same thing. They don't widen their trunks the way that, let's say standard trees do. So are palm trees actually trees? Obviously, that's a question for a botanist or a plant expert and whatever, and while I'm certainly a plant enthusiast, as you can see from my meager urban garden behind me, since trees don't have brains yet, I'm by no means, fluent enough in what it is to be a tree to come to a conclusion on that question. And as far as I can tell, it's sort of a semantic ongoing debate. But I bring all this up because, let's just go with the argument that some actual tree experts make, right? So, by the way, tree experts are called dendrologists. Which I have to note as a neuroscience person, is clearly using the same root word as a very important anatomical word that we use in neuroscience, dendrite. Okay, dendrites are the parts of the neuron where they receive the signals from other neurons, and the term is quite literally derived from a Greek term that means of or pertaining to a tree. Pretty cool. And you can sort of see that they do sort of look tree-like, right? With even those lovely little dendritic spines, those little green blebs, which are, the actual points of information ingestion when it comes to a neuron, and they sort of look like leaves on a tree, right? Poking out from a stem. Pretty cool. Anyway, so let's just go with that argument that some dendrologists and botanists make, which is that palm trees aren't actually trees at all and are maybe more like large herbs that sometimes have a bit of woodiness sometimes. Ecologists, by the way, would evidently disagree with that and just they're trees. But let's just go with palm trees aren't actually being trees. So my daughter has seen a few palms in her short time on the planet and she absolutely identified them as trees. Great. But if they're not actually trees, then her tree identification skills would need to be refined to incorporate that nuance. Okay, so if you stuck with me through that whole parable, machine learning operates in a sort of similar way. So imagine you have a computer program that's designed to identify trees in pictures, right? That's its whole purpose. That's what it does, to be absolutely fantastic and accurate at identifying trees in pictures. And the way it works is that you feed it hundreds and hundreds, maybe thousands of pictures that have trees in them. And so as a result, just like my daughter, this computer program learns to identify certain features within a picture. And you haven't necessarily told them what those features are. It just comes to recognize those things, right? Woody trunk, a bunch of branches with little leaves poking off of them, and so on, right? Things like that. The computer program is operating very, very similarly to how a little fledgling human is operating when learning to identify and categorize new things. Pretty cool, machine learning. And similarly, our tree identifying AI would almost certainly make precisely the same mistake of saying that, it's looking at a tree when you feed it a picture of a palm, right? Just like my daughter, this AI would need to be instructed that, well, actually palm trees aren't trees. And so that's the process, right? It's fundamentally a learning process, an artificial learning process, but occurring exclusively via computer code that's altering itself in response to exposure to more and more new information. Again, eerily similar to how the brain operates. Does the same thing, physically modifies itself. Okay, So, having a tree identifying AI is certainly nice to have, right? I actually literally used one on my afternoon walk with my daughter yesterday to figure out what kind of tree we were looking at. Turned out to be a banana tree, which is sort of bananas to see here in Philly, right? It's going to be interesting to see how they fare through winter. But so it's nice to have, nice tool to have, but not exactly going to fundamentally alter the human experience or lifespan or health span, right? And so that brings us to the article I want to discuss today. So this is a group out of Lithuania, which is pretty awesome. And they're fundamentally using machine learning to diagnose Alzheimer's disease early on in its progression using MRIs, using brain scans. And so I'm sure basically everybody's familiar with Alzheimer's disease. It's the most common cause of dementia. Statistics suggest that someone in the world develops dementia every 3 seconds. And rates of dementia diagnoses are projected to continue to escalate worldwide as time goes on, and particularly rapidly in low and middle income countries, though in high income countries as well. Alzheimer's and dementia is already one of the leading causes of fatalities in the United States, just under strokes, and just under and just above diabetes. Let's see, do I have it? Yeah, there we go. Yep. So I mean, certainly among the top sources of human suffering, and then the numbers actually look pretty similar worldwide. And so this is the causes of death of people who are 70 years or older in the world. And so this is quite literally one of the most critical sources of human suffering, right? Both for the folks who have reached older ages, as well as people who love them, right? The trouble is that it's extremely difficult to know when someone is developing Alzheimer's and dementia early on. Let's see. Oop. Right, it's super tough to recognize. It's basically impossible in the particularly early stages of Alzheimer's and dementia, because the symptoms can come across as just having like an off day, or like not getting enough sleep, right, or being hungover or something, right? It's kind of a notorious challenge when it comes to Alzheimer's disease, catching it early. However, there are some neuroimaging techniques, things like fMRI, functional magnetic resonance imaging, and PET scans that can be used to potentially identify Alzheimer's disease as it's progressing earlier on, right, before there's any obvious overt manifestations. But it's still very, very difficult, because what you're fundamentally looking for are really subtle changes in the structure and the anatomy of the brain. And so this group set out to figure out if they could use machine learning, what would informally be called artificial intelligence, to pick up on those subtle changes that might get by a human eye. And so they were using a system called ResNet 18, which stands for Residual Neural Network 18. And they were working with a database of a whole ton of brain imaging from folks with Alzheimer's. And then the AI set to work, right? And so just like I feed my daughter a whole bunch of different kinds of trees, right? Pictures of trees. This AI was fed a whole ton of brain scans. And it was basically shown images of brains with and without Alzheimer's disease and at various stages, right? They actually incorporated more categories of the progression of Alzheimer's. And so tens of thousands of brain scans, okay? And so this AI learned to recognize a brain scan of someone with Alzheimer's disease, and particularly mild cognitive impairment, which is basically the state of affairs that someone experiences when they're in the sort of earlier stages of developing Alzheimer's and dementia. And so mild cognitive impairment, or MCI, it's that tricky phase, right? We all experience at least a bit of cognitive impairment as we get older, right? Everybody. It's technically already started happening in me, and I have every reason to believe that I'm pretty garden variety, standard, healthy adult, right? But as someone in his 30s, we all begin to experience a bit of decline. It's unavoidable. However, when someone is developing dementia of some kind, there's a bit of additional cognitive decline, right? A mild cognitive impairment, and it manifests in sort of friction when it comes to like language, speaking, judgment, and of course memory. And so generally, mild cognitive impairment is a state where someone, and sometimes the people around them, can sort of tell that something has changed, right? That their normal capabilities are just slipping a bit. And so, things like losing your train of thought mid-conversation happens to everybody, right? Every now and then. But for people with mild cognitive impairment, it starts to happen more frequently, right? Or forgetting important things that you scheduled, or just behaving in uncharacteristically sort of impulsive ways, or getting lost a little bit more easily, or feeling overwhelmed by having to make a decision, or having to plan something big and complicated and important. So, maybe some of the folks who are listening here can get a sense of why mild cognitive impairment can be sort of tricky to pick up on, right? Particularly early on. And so, I think it's safe to say that all of us have, at one point or another, had all those experiences I just listed, right? We've all behaved impulsively, uncharacteristically impulsively. We've all lost our train of thought in mid-sentence, right? But the point is that the frequency of those experiences increases. They happen more regularly with someone who has mild cognitive impairment. And so that's why I found this study to be pretty exciting. So this group in Lithuania, using this AI system trained by thousands and thousands of brain scans of healthy individuals and folks with Alzheimer's disease at various stages, this system was capable of reaching an accuracy of well over 99% when identifying the brain scans of people experiencing various stages of mild cognitive impairment, compared to brain scans of people who developed Alzheimer's disease, right? And so in other words, it was able to identify the brain scans of people in the very early stages of developing Alzheimer's disease before they sort of developed Alzheimer's disease, right? And so it was able to do it for over 99 out of 100 scans. That accuracy is just bananas, particularly when it comes to specifically identifying early stages of mild cognitive impairment. And so, compared to the tools that we currently have, right, in the armamentarium of physicians, the tools that are used to detect mild cognitive impairment, while there are some biological tests that can be done, physicians currently have to rely on basically the output of the brain, right? So in other words, trying to detect the impairment itself rather than, a direct measure of the state of the brain, the biology of the brain, when it comes to the earliest stages, right? So having a tool like this is going to be an absolute game changer. However, this particular study is still preliminary, right? And so here's a quote from one of the scientists. Quote, "Although this was not the first attempt to diagnose the early onset of Alzheimer's from similar data, our main breakthrough is the accuracy of the algorithm. Obviously, such high numbers are not indicators of true real-life performance, but we're working with medical institutions to get more data." End quote. So a good and humble and I think accurate evaluation of this innovation. And so in other words, this system isn't really ready for prime time. It's not ready for game time quite yet. It hasn't been deployed in that kind of a situation. These are data that are entirely unambiguous, right? The scientists are working with scans of brains that are already categorized. They already know at what stages the various scans were, right? And so when it comes to any random brain scan, right, we don't really know how the system would work, right? But you got to start somewhere. And this is a hell of a start. And so another reason that I dig the work that this group has done is that they're totally open with their data and their system. And so they're not commercializing it, in other words. They want other groups to be able to use their innovations, right? Improve on them, deploy them however they see fit. And so in other words, it's just a wonderful expression of the most beautiful feature of pure science, and you don't necessarily see it all the time. And so here's a quote from that same scientist. Quote, "We need to make the most of data. That's why our research group focuses on the European open science principle, so anyone can use our knowledge and develop it further. I believe that this principle contributes greatly to societal advancement." End quote. Wonderful. And so to be clear, if they have a system that's truly capable of identifying the earliest stages of mild cognitive impairment, that will be incredibly valuable, particularly as it improves, right? And it would, or perhaps will, make a very notable mark in science. And so, that they're sharing it is just, it's worthy of our accolades, right? And so, once again, this is like the beta version, or really it's more like the pre-beta. I don't really know what programmers use for a version of a program that's not even beta yet, but, they were working purely with brain scans. And they achieved over 99% accuracy. Accuracy at identifying one of the most difficult to identify stages of mild cognitive impairment and dementia and Alzheimer's, right? So imagine if they integrate all the other features that are known to be associated with mild cognitive impairment, right? So everything from the behavioral stuff that's currently used by neurologists to identify mild cognitive impairment, right? That's what's being used right now as we speak. But then also, they could integrate things like blood tests, right? That have been shown to be able to predict for Alzheimer's many years, like 20 years before it ever manifests, right? That was from a group at the University of California in San Francisco, one of the top neuroscience institutions in the world, using a blood testing technique that focuses on the presence of specific molecules associated with Alzheimer's disease, right, in the blood. So anyways, imagine being able to combine an AI system like this group's with a completely different domain of testing, right? A molecular test, a blood test. That'll basically be the best of multiple scientific domains coming to fruition and working together to confront one of the greatest sources of human suffering in the world. So it's extremely exciting, and I love that this group, who developed this platform, I love it that it was them, right? Given their commitment to sharing their progress with the scientific community. Okay, so before we close, I want to make it clear that this field, this field of using AI in medicine and diagnostics specifically, in other words, identifying if a person has a disease or perhaps what that disease might be, the exploration of how it is that we'll use AI, machine learning, artificial neural networks, and so on. This is an extremely active domain of science. This is absolutely going to be one of the venues of the integration of artificial intelligence into human life, into our daily life, improving our abilities to make medical decisions by detecting opportunities to medically intervene as early as possible, preventing people from ending up in conditions from which they can't recover, right? And so, but okay, to finally answer the question, is AI smarter than doctors? Well, in some ways, yes, right? When asked very, very specific questions for which, we have thousands and thousands of data points and examples that can be used to train the AI, machine learning, artificial intelligence can achieve levels of accuracy that are well beyond human doctors. But doctors are far, far more versatile and creative and, cognitively nimble than AI, certainly is right now, right? And maybe will ever be. That part that AI may never be as cognitively nimble as humans, that is definitely a point of controversy in neuroscience and neurophilosophy and computer science, and I actually don't personally believe that that's true, that it'll never be as versatile and creative as humans. But, given our current state of technological development, it's certainly true today, right? Doctors are definitely more creative and versatile than any machine learning platform. Okay, so is AI smarter than doctors? Kind of, in some very narrow cases though. But then again, that question is sort of like asking if a hammer is stronger than a carpenter, right? Or if a wrench is stronger than an engineer, right? Well, kind of, yeah, like they are. Hammers and wrenches can do things that humans can't do, right? But we just don't think about tools that way, right? So while AI is almost certainly going to be replacing some of the responsibilities that physicians currently have, right, in the clinic, particularly in certain medical disciplines, right, like radiology and pathology, where physicians are trained to recognize, the signatures of certain diseases by literally looking at pictures and evaluating what they see, right? Categories. And so that's the kind of thing where AI will be able to do it far more efficiently, rapidly, consistently, and that'll free up physicians who'd otherwise be spending their days sitting down and looking at pictures to do other things, right? Or to supervise the AI systems, to see when they're making mistakes, or maybe the physicians will be making the final decisions after using all of the advice that the AI system has provided to them after the scans have been fed through their system. Like, okay, so for example, someone gets a biopsy of some part of their body, right, their skin or something, and slides are fed through this AI system. What, is pretty reasonable to expect is that, the AI will then spit out something like a, 88% probability that this biopsy contains a squamous cell carcinoma, right? 10% chance it's some other type of cancer, and 2% chance that it's just something else, right? Or when it comes to the brain, it could be the same kind of thing, right? But more like 80% chance of mild cognitive impairment, 18% chance it's more advanced, and so on, right? And then the physicians will be able to make more informed decisions as a result. And so in other words, I think what we're going to see, at least in the near term, is that AI will be used as a very, very, very helpful tool in diagnostics, right? Enabling physicians to more accurately and consistently identify what malady a person has, and then more importantly, being able to do it at a far earlier stage of the progression of the disease, and do so far more efficiently and make better treatment decisions, and it'll be a tool, in other words, not a replacement, at least not a replacement for everything that a good physician has to do. Okay. That's what I have for you. If you dig this kind of discussion, maybe you'll consider liking and subscribing and doing all those types of things. Otherwise, I will see you next week, and thanks for watching. And hey, Scott, good to see you, man. So Scott says, Ex Machina was really good at showing AI's uncaring ability to manipulate humans to reach its own goals. Yeah. Alex says, yeah, I'm all about movies, not so much books. Well, yeah, I mean, whatever. Everybody has their own, Superintelligence is also very long. I'll admit I did not finish it. I just didn't have time. I should pick it up again. But it's one of those books where it helps to have an audiobook, and you crank it up to like 2x. but it is a good book. And I mean, another thing that I like to do if I know that I'm not going to be able to finish a book is look for interviews that the authors do. These days, authors must go on these long tours where they, give hour-long, 2-hour-long talks and answer questions and stuff. And Nick Bostrom, who did Superintelligence, definitely did that. So I would recommend it. People disagree with him, but I think it's safe to say that Nick Bostrom is probably, if not the leading philosopher on the topic of AI, definitely one of the leading philosophers. Scott also says, The Imitation Game was an entertaining movie, but they made up a lot of it, unfortunately. I never saw it. I heard it was really good, though. And so Scott also says, palm trees are actually giant pineapples, scientific fact. And then that reminds me of getting into arguments with dummies over whether tomatoes, cucumbers, pumpkins, etc. are fruits or vegetables. Strawberries aren't really berries, but bananas are. Wild stuff. Yeah, I know. And really, who cares if a palm tree is an actual tree, right? Another funny plant that I used to have, but I did not succeed. It's one of my rare complete failures is a sago palm, not actually a palm. It's actually also potentially kind of dangerous. But anyways, and then Watchmaker says, good afternoon from Brazil. I didn't know you were from Brazil. Awesome. Welcome. Well, okay, so that's what I have for you today. Really cool paper, very exciting. Once again, if you dig this kind of discussion of neuroscience, philosophy, neurophilosophy, and medicine and stuff like that, maybe you'll consider subscribing if you haven't. Otherwise, thanks for watching, and I will see you next week.